Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Saul. Good to talk to you again.
Good evening.
All right, so what's your take on what the OECD is saying? I have to say that a lot of it is not new.
Yeah, they're telling us a lot what we know already. The interesting thing about the report is that it benchmarks South Africa, which is a developing country, against the OECD countries, which are all developed countries. And when you unpack some of the recommendations, it seems not necessarily, some things that are appropriate for our history and circumstances.
All right,
so I think they're definitely right on the need to implement. I think everyone knows that, and everyone would agree with that.
All right, give us some examples of where you think that they don't quite understand then perhaps our realities in terms of policy shifts.
So one of the recommendations they are making is to increase the VAT rates. They're saying that we need more tax revenues in order to take forward some of the work that government needs to do, and some of the things that need to be implemented or would require. And then they say that should be coupled with giving the poorest money back through social grants. So in part, I would agree. We do need to make sure that the poorest of the poor are get continued support with a special COVID grant and continuation of that. I think there's been fairly widespread agreement that that's been a very important measure. But raising the VAT rate at this stage would really hit the middle class. And by here, I'm talking about people who are earning 5,000 Rand to 25,000 a month. So it's people who are already under pressure with rising fuel costs, rising food prices, and then to raise it further would risk pushing them over the edge. I mean, the contrary might be, actually, we should be looking at how we can give money back to the middle class during these difficult times as well. So how can, through the tax system, they're all pretty much working class people in that category, and people who might be in middle management, who really would need, just a couple of £100 back from SARS, from their tax, and it would really make a huge difference to the bottom line at this point in time. So, I mean, there might be a lot of other differences. They also gloss over a few things, things that would make a big difference, like public transport. So they do talk about the need for infrastructure, but one of the big things that would make a huge difference to people who are facing serious cost of living increases would be a much more effective public transport system that's cheaper and hopefully not based on liquid fuels, but like a more efficient, like an old tram system, but something of that magnitude, where it's not driven by carbon emitting fuels, but something that can really lower the cost of living for people. Those are the kind of things that we really need to see at this point in time.
So where's the disconnect between policy development and implementation? Sure.
So part of it is we are a democracy, and things are contested in a democracy. So your policies have to cater to multiple constituencies and have to address different interest groups. So if you only have targeted measure at one interest groups, you're not going to get things through. So when we're looking at policies, we need to look at how we addressing the different groupings that do require support in different ways. It's when we, for example, one of the things that, also going back to the report, is that they don't talk enough about is the fact that we're underrepresented in the small business space. And it's come up in other global reports, but I didn't see it covered in their one. But I mean, that's something that where you can't say that a micro enterprise needs the same support as a medium enterprise that's employing 200 people. So you do need to support both, but you need different measures and different support measures. And the same would go for ordinary people. So I think that's one area of where we do need to think about the gap between policy and implementation. The other is that there was a drain of skills out of the public sector. And and institutions were broken. You know, we all know what happened with the attempts to get hold on the purses of institutions, and good people were forced out or they left voluntarily. And the process has begun to fix all of that. But fixing institutions and getting them working again is a long process. It is happening, and we can see it in all of the big important state institutions where that process is well underway. But it does take a while to fix these institutions. And those are key to implementing public policy.
I suppose also that we all can play a role. Productivity is a word that keeps coming up in this report. And I know sometimes it's pointed to government. We all know that government departments could be more efficient, more productive, and sometimes are quite bloated in terms of staff. But I also get a sense that, us as workers maybe need to have a culture shift in terms of productivity. Are these some of the things that we need to enthuse in a population beyond just the policies that we see in these documents?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would agree with that was in that report is the real need to support improved levels of education across the board. So productivity doesn't only rest with the individual, it's how your organization is structured, for example. So if you're a worker on a factory floor and the layout of the factory is not done effectively, you're not going to be as productive as you could be. If the supply chain of the factory is not effective, so something breaks down and it takes 4 hours to fix instead of 4 minutes to fix, or even gets replaced with new technologies these days, there's sensors that send signals to replace beforehand. If you don't have those investments made, your factory is not going to be productive. So it does require investment in basic education, but also in the technologies and in how things are working in institutions so that employees across the board can be more effective. And that's really important. So from basic education through to how we run companies, there's room to improve productivity. And these things are important, not only for effective governance, but also for companies being competitive in global markets. We're talking about, particularly on the industrialization side, the need for localization. Localization only really works effectively is when you have companies that can compete and are able to compete head on head with pricing and quality of what would be imported. And that's where we do have a lot of capabilities on that, but it does require investments and the need for productivity as well.
Saul Levin, always great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Thanks for your time.
Good. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's Saul Levin, who's the CEO of the Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies grouping, also known as TIPS, talking to us about the OECD's findings, their report saying that South Africa really needs to implement the policies and strategies that they put on the table.